So it's no secret that I'm a very big fan of Grand Seiko. However, many have been asking, why would you spend 10 times the price, 20 times the price of a Seiko for the addition of the word Grand? And I completely understand that question. It's probably the most relatable question because about a few years ago, I was also thinking the same thing. What's all this hype with Grand Seiko? Is it just a Hodinkee hype? What is going on? Why is everybody going crazy over Grand Seiko? It's not until I saw my first Grand Seiko in the metal, by the way it was the Snowflake, where I started to kind of understand, okay, there's something special about this piece, it's different. Then you look closer, then you keep looking closer, and in the famous words of John Mayer, look closer still, and that's when you realize how different the Grand Seiko is from Seiko. So in today's episode, I wanted to share with you guys kind of an under $500 Seiko versus a very popular Snowflake, which is the SBGA 407. And we're going to see what exactly do you get for basically 10, 20 times the price of a regular Seiko. But first off guys, my name is AB, I run the Watch Collecting Chai Productions, and today's episode is sponsored by Exquisite Timepieces. When considering your first luxury purchase, it's important to buy a watch from a trusted dealer. Exquisite Timepieces are fully authorized dealers for some of the biggest brands in the market. They're based out of Naples, Florida, and they've been in the luxury watch business for over 20 years with trusted clients from all over the world. Exquisite Timepieces is authorized for over 80 luxury brands such as Omega, Breguet, Hublot, Grand Seiko, Laurent Ferrier, Moser, and many more. So when you're considering your next luxury purchase, make sure you hit up exquisitetimepieces.com, let them know that you heard about them from this channel, and they'll hook you up over there at www.exquisitetimepieces.com. When considering going from Seiko to Grand Seiko, you will be skeptical. Having both pieces in front of you, at a glance, you can see two everyday watches with artistic dials, a date, they're both mechanical, and most importantly, they both have the word Seiko on the dial. For the longest time, I couldn't comprehend the hype behind Grand Seiko. Why are people spending JLC money on a Seiko? And what's worse, a few years ago, even the brand themselves couldn't properly communicate why they're special. So today we will finally find out by comparing one of the best Seikos you can buy for under $500 versus an icon of the brand, and quite frankly one of the most beautiful watches I've ever seen, the Grand Seiko Skyflake. To fully understand Seiko as a brand, we need to take a brief look at what makes them special. Why is Seiko so loved by the watch community, and how are they able to deliver so much value? Seiko has been producing watches since 1881, and the brand completely disrupted the industry in the 1970s when they popularized a new technology called quartz. That new technology was precise to 0.1 seconds per day, an advancement that had the industry shook. The brands were to join this new king or accept the defeat and remain a part of history. Hundreds of brands were forced to shut down, including some that I hope will make a comeback, like Universal Genève. By the way, why is no one trying to revive that brand? Anyway, Seiko even forced the hands of the greats, Rolex, Patek, Audemars Piguet. All of them bent the knee and decided to follow Seiko's footsteps and created quartz pieces as well. The most admirable thing Seiko does, even to this day, is they're still trying to keep the mechanical watch industry alive. Not just that, they're doing so much while delivering some of the best value affordable watches in that segment. Now the watch we have in front of us is the Seiko SARY 147, an incredible 38mm watch with a mechanical movement and a stunning dial. Looking at the dial, you'll be hard pressed to understand why Grand Seiko costs so much. After all, Grand Seiko's dials is what I use to convince people they're worth looking at. The texture is stunning, with a breaking ice-like texture giving depth to the dial rarely seen at this price. The watch has a seconds hand which is blue, but it isn't heated blue, it's only painted, which is important for when we talk about Grand Seiko. The watch is fully polished with regular distortions you see in any polished case at this price. And finally, the watch has a fully in-house caliber, the 4R, which has an average deviation of -15 to +30 seconds per day, which, to be honest, is quite terrible. My personal belief is that Seiko gives these promises because of the amount of watches they actually produce, but in real world use, I've never had anything exceed 10 seconds. Still not chronometer standards, but the movement is reliable, easy to service by any watchmaker. This Seiko also delivers 50 meters of water resistance, a sapphire crystal, and finally the most mind-boggling part about this whole thing, the entire watch down to the last screw is fully in-house, making the $500 price seem rather generous from the brand. The amount of value you get with this Seiko is unreal, but it does raise a more important question. Why is there an added decimal point to the addition of the word grand? So, here you have it, the Grand Seiko. What about this watch cost so much more than the other Seiko we looked at? The Seiko was remarkable. How could Grand Seiko make it even better, especially at its price? A $500 watch versus a $5,500 watch. Is it actually worth it? Allow me to share with you why I think so. Imagine the Japanese getting so bored of waiting for the Swiss to innovate that instead of waiting for the Swiss to motivate them to create something new, instead they decided to compete within themselves. That's when Seiko created Daini and Suwa, basically Grand Seiko and King Seiko. Having these two companies compete within themselves, even though they're technically the same company, inspired innovation and inspired the Japanese to create some of the best watches in the world. That is when Grand Seiko was technically created. To this day, Grand Seiko still has the exact same goal that they did back then. It's not necessarily about competing with it themselves, it's about beating the Swiss. And to this day, Grand Seiko still creates some of the best watches in its price segment. Allow me to explain to you why this $5,500 watch is completely different from the $500 Seiko we saw earlier. The level of detail you get on Grand Seiko's dials is on another level. Think of it like seeing 4K for the very first time. You see a very crisp and sharp with little to no problems with the dial. There's just nothing there. Every time I put this under the loupe, I can't find any mistakes. No matter what I do, I've handled over 50 Grand Seikos so far, and still every time I put it under my macro lens, I've yet to find any mistakes. Maybe minor dust particles that I can't even see with the macro lens, but that's the beauty of Grand Seiko. They care about the smallest details, which is what a lot of Swiss brands kind of lack. The case on Grand Seiko is distortion free, which is what they call Zaratsu polishing. Unlike many affordable watches including the Seiko, Seiko uses a technique that they call Zaratsu polishing, which in normal human terms, it just means mirror-like polishing. If you look into the case, you'll see your face with no reflections or distortions. Now the second thing you get is also that same Zaratsu polishing on the markers, which creates a beautiful shine every time the light hits it. It just sucks up the light in a way that makes the watch so luxurious. Not to mention, there's no flaws with those indices. It's perfectly polished and it's absolutely stunning. The hands and even the applied logo is finished to that same standard. Everything about this watch is honestly perfect. And that's what you get with Grand Seiko. You know that they give a level of care that you can't even find with brands 2, 3, 4, even 10 times the price of Grand Seiko. That's one of the beauty of having this brand. You buy a watch that you know the watchmaker actually cares about the product that they're delivering to you. Now I'm sure you've noticed that beautiful smooth sweep on the hands versus the Seiko, and that's because this one has a spring drive caliber, the 9R15, which has an accuracy of plus or minus 1 second per day and approximately 10 seconds per month, versus the average deviation the Seiko was giving us of minus 15 seconds to plus 30 seconds per day. As I mentioned, you don't always get that, but plus or minus 1 second per day is actually guaranteed by Grand Seiko. Not to mention the 9R15 is exceptionally finished and is just an overall fantastic caliber. You get 72 hours of power reserve, and overall, as soon as you see that smooth sweep, it's just very hard to look at any other mechanical sweep. So overall, what you get with Grand Seiko versus the Seiko, or many other brands for that matter, is a level of attention to detail that just gives you that feeling that you know this watch was done with love, with care, and overall, it's just perfect inside and out. Whether or not people will know about it, you'll know about it. You'll know that this watch is perfect from the inside. You'll know that somebody took care of this watch before they gave it to you, which is why we love watches. It's because it's an art of the human touch. And that is why Grand Seiko costs so much. Is it worth it? Well, that's something you need to decide. Because while I personally find it worth it, you might find the Seiko, which is also an amazing timepiece, just a better value for you overall. But if you want something that is a piece of art, I would highly consider the Grand Seiko. But guys, what did you think? Is the Grand Seiko worth it, or would you just go with a Seiko? Let us know in the comment section below. Guys, as always, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you in the next one.